Welcome, everybody. I just silenced my cell phone, I'll just have you know. I want to welcome all my friends and colleagues to the 43rd annual meeting of the American Association of Endocrine Surgeons. My name is Cord Sturgeon. I have the honor of presiding over this conference this week. It's also my pleasure to introduce to you a number of other officers, and if you can bring up the slides, I'd appreciate that. Yeah, looks like it's up to me. Here we go. Aha. So I want to recognize and introduce the officers that have helped put together this meeting and helped me all year run the society. From the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see our treasurer, Tracy Wang. Of course, right next to her is Barb Miller, my secretary. Straight off the pages of GQ magazine is Kepal Patel, recorder. My right hand, Mira Milas, my vice president, and of course, your president-elect, Carmen Solarsino, who'll be taking over the reins of this organization in just a few days. I also want to recognize other members of the governance of AAES, including our past presidents and counselors. On the top row, you see Alan Siperstein, our past president. Immediate past president is Tom Fahey, Herb Chen. Denise Carniero-Pla is one of our counselors. So is Carrie Cunningham, Peter Zacco, Rachel Kells, Jennifer Kuo, and Bernessa Lindemann. They've all been instrumental in bringing together this meeting for all of you today. I'd be remiss to not thank also the AAES staff that run everything behind the scenes and make sure that everything's working. Lauren Santangelo is our executive director, and I have more emails from Lauren Santangelo than any person on earth right now. It's great, I love her. She's really been so helpful in getting this together. Behind the scenes, Emily Williams, our project coordinator, Alexa Bell, Education Events, and Margaret Cloyd, Association Administrator. They've really been helpful. We have a number of highlights that I want to go over real quick for this meeting. Today, we'll have the UCSF Carol and Orlo H. Clark Distinguished Lecture in Endocrine Surgery, which will be brought to us by Emeritus Professor Keith Heller, who now works full-time at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I'm really looking forward to his talk called Listening to Our Artists. This will be at 9 a.m. Also on Sunday, we will have the MCW Stuart Wilson, MD, Historical Lecture, which will be by William Rainey at the University of Michigan, and he will be telling us about the historic and cellular origins of primary aldosteronism. On Monday, the Honorable Senator Doug Jones will be joining us to give us an inspirational talk in the morning titled Justice Delayed, Not Justice Denied, the prosecution of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing cases. This is not to be missed. It's a great honor to have the Senator come and talk to us at this meeting. Also, I want to thank all of our sponsors in this room immediately next to the ballroom. You see that they're all set up over there. They're excited and ready to show you their products. And frankly, without this level of sponsorship, we have so many sponsors this year. Without this level of sponsorship, there's no way that we can put on this type of meeting. So it's really important that we go and recognize them and thank them for being here for us, and also take a look at what they've brought to show us. I'm going to invite Kepal Patel to the podium to review our past winners of the Oliver Corp Award.
Thank you, Kurt. All right, so I want to take a few minutes to honor our past Oliver Cope Meritorious Achievement Award recipients. As you know, this award is the most prestigious and highest honor that is given by the AAES. It's given to a member of the AAES in recognition for contributions in the field of endocrine surgery as an investigator, teacher, and clinical surgeon. It is not an award that is given each year. It is reserved for members who have achieved the high standards for which this award was established. A little historical vignette here. In 1985, this recognition was bestowed upon Dr. Oliver Cope, professor of surgery at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and since then it's been called the Oliver Cope Award, and only 9 others have received this award. Dr. Stanley Friesen, Dr. Norman Thompson, Dr. John Van Heerden, Dr. Orlo Clark, Dr. Edwin Kaplan, Dr. George Irwin, Dr. Stuart Wilson, Dr. Quan Du, and Dr. Janice Pasica. These individuals are giants in our field, truly amazing, who continue to inspire all of us. They represent the best that this society has to offer. And most importantly, they do it with humility. In my opinion, each and every one of these individuals has made each and every one of us a better person. So let's please give a large round of applause for all of them. Now, this next individual embodies everything that this award represents. As an investigator, he has published over 670 papers, the first one being in 1976. He has been an invited speaker more than 1,500 times. He has advanced our field in countless ways. He was one of the first to describe the concept of risk stratification for thyroid cancer, and his seminal work in the 1980s on the extent of surgery for well-differentiated thyroid cancer laid the foundation for our current guidelines and management of patients. As a teacher and a clinical surgeon, he has trained countless students, residents, and fellows, and has been a mentor to almost each and every one of us in this room in some way or fashion. He always does this with a smile on his face and treats everybody with respect and kindness. His service to the AES includes the role of vice president and president twice, once due to the untimely passing of Dr. Paul Adjorfo. He hasn't missed a meeting since 1985. He's kind of like the Cal Ripken of endocrine surgeons. And that's a little baseball analogy because he's also the Bud Selig Professor of Surgery, who was a former baseball commissioner. His comments and actions at our annual meetings are unforgettable. For example, the Monterey meeting, during the interesting case presentation, which some of you will remember, the electricity went out, the lights went out, and he just continued to proceed with the interesting case presentation as if nothing was going on. So, this is the kind of individual he is. I am extremely lucky to be able to call him a mentor, a colleague, and a friend. He instilled a love of endocrine surgery into me. There is no greater pleasure than being a mentee who gets to honor one of his mentors. Always the first one to the microphone, I know that he thinks of AES as his home, and he treats us, all of us, as part of his family. And I think he may have actually coined the term endocrine family. I'm not sure about that. Every time we meet, his first question to me is, how's your family? He's truly deserving of this special award. I know that he has a special place in his heart for our society, and now our society has a special place for him. Please help me welcome the 2023 Oliver Cope Meritorious Achievement Award recipient. As we all know him, Shaha, New York, Dr. Ashok Shaha.
Well deserved. You want to make a comment?
It's easy to make comments when there is a scientific presentation, difficult to make comments when there is a personal commitment. I just want to express my sincere thanks to Kepal for a generous introduction. As I always say, wish my wife was here, my kids were here, but I hope somebody has taped it. To me, this is the greatest honor in my academic career. This society, I was just mentioning before, I attended this first time in 1985. There were about 80 people in Chicago. And I was amazed, everybody knew each other. And giants in the field of endocrine surgery like Norm Thompson, Orlo Clark, Ed Kaplan, they embraced the younger individuals. And I think that's the beauty of this society. This is something that comes from the heart of every attendee. And that's why I used to call this endocrine family. And I felt very honored to be here, to be the president of this society. I served this society in different capacities, including local chairman for the meeting in New York, which was a great organization. Once again, thank you very much. This will be something that I will cherish for the rest of my life. Thank you very much.
Great job, Kevin. Whew. That was fantastic. This past fall, we lost a founding member of our society, Dr. Orlo Clark. He was a world-renowned endocrine surgeon, a member and friend to countless endocrine surgeons across the world. It was a great honor to know him and to learn from him. Please take time to read his tribute in the program book. We'll spend some time honoring the life of Dr. Clark in the next session when we introduce the lecture which is named after him. And I know we all miss him. So please join me in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you. So next, it's my honor to invite Bernessa Lindemann and Jess Fanzen to the stage, our co-local arrangements chairs. Come on up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. President. And at long last, please allow me to finally welcome you to Birmingham. I've heard the joke from many that I get the award for the longest standing local arrangements chair ever for the AAES, going strong since 2019. But we are certainly delighted to have each and every one of you here with us here in person in Birmingham. I'm going to toss over to my partner in crime, Dr. Jessica Fazendine. Do you want to run the... Okay.
So again, at this time, thank you so much for being here. We love having you in our city, and I think it's so important to acknowledge where we've come from. So at this time, I would like to make a special acknowledgement to the Piqua Shawnee tribe, who were the original stewards of this land. And so there are a diverse and unique group of Native Americans and indigenous people that still occupy this area. So we thank them for their original stewardship of this land.
We also wanted to thank the University of Alabama and the Heersink School of Medicine for allowing us to use facilities to host 3 fantastic pre-meeting courses along with Endocrine Surgery University over the past 2 days. It was certainly wonderful to see many of you there. And we just wanted to acknowledge all of the people that helped to make these courses run. I think it's truly part of the endocrine family, as Dr. Shaha put it, that people are so willing to give their time and their energy to devote to this organization. So here's ultrasound and RFA course. These are individuals that led or spoke at the leadership course, the first ever AAES leadership course.
And then again, I just want to make a special plug for tonight's President's Reception. We believe this will be a very powerful gathering with fellowship between us all, and again to go over kind of where our city has come from and an integral role that it has played in American history. So this is tonight. From 6:30 to 8:30, there will be a shuttle that's about a 35% shuttle that will pick up and do a loop for about 2 hours at the lobby entrance of the Sheraton Hotel. It is a less than 1 mile walk from here, and there are some pleasant things to see between here and the Civil Rights Institute So if you are able to, I'm sure there will be groups of us walking over there together, but that's tonight from 6:30 to 8:30. So now, everyone, please get your cell phones out and take a screenshot or open your camera and open this QR code. We obviously want to engage everyone here at this meeting, and that means growing our membership and our presence on social media. So these are links to Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. For those of you that have not been able to log into the Wi-Fi yet, the password is AAES 2023, and that AAES is all in caps. And then my last announcement that I would like to make is that we thank our sponsor, Intuitive, who has graciously, as you will notice in the adjacent room, set up a robotics console and a simulator. And so this is my plug for all of the medical students, the residents, and every single one of our AAES fellows, whether you've done robotics or not, to go ahead and compete with us. And we've put a plug for our president and president-elect to do the same. But over the next 24 hours, we invite you to go to the console, and there is a task that is set up for you just to get used to doing some surgical ergonomic work. And our scores will be set up in competition style, and tomorrow we'll announce the 4 finalists that will compete during the business hour tomorrow afternoon. And there will be a cash prize of $150 to the winner, $75 to the runner-up, and $50 for third place. And so it's a nice way to engage with each other, our sponsor who has graciously been here, and then also hopefully our president and president-elect.
And last but certainly not least, I wanted to invite a special guest this morning to greet and welcome you all, and that is Dr. Anupam Agarwal. He is the Senior Vice President for Medicine and Dean of the Heersink School of Medicine at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He also served previously as Executive Vice Dean as well as the Division Director for Nephrology. And notably, he is a past president of the American Society of Nephrology. And he was instrumental in helping to foster collaboration between our 2 organizations that led to the development of the joint guidelines for definitive management of secondary and tertiary renal hyperparathyroidism. He's here to welcome you briefly to our wonderful city.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anupam Agarwal. I'm Senior Vice President for Medicine and Dean for UAB Heersink School of Medicine. On behalf of our school, I want to welcome everyone to this 2023 meeting of the American Association of Endocrine Surgeons. We are really thrilled, as Vanessa just highlighted, to have the opportunity to host this meeting in Birmingham in 2023 after the delay from the 2020 meeting when this was actually planned for due to the COVID pandemic. I'm also delighted to recognize my close friend and colleague and our chair of surgery, Dr. Herb Chen, past president of this society, for his exceptional leadership and contributions to the field of endocrine surgery as demonstrated by his various leadership role and his role now on the council of this society. His unwavering commitment to this society has also demonstrated through his efforts in all the fundraising for the society and the creation of the foundation for the Association of American Endocrine Surgeons. And actually, he was the one to propose Birmingham as a venue for this meeting in 2018. So Herb, thank you for your leadership. It's a privilege to have you all here, a distinguished gathering of endocrine surgeons, researchers, healthcare professionals, students, fellows, and others. So really thrilled to have you all in person at one place. As a nephrologist, I closely interact with endocrine surgeons who are involved with taking care of patients with, who require parathyroid surgery. And as Vanessa just highlighted, during my tenure as ASN president in 2020, Herb reached out to us to see if we could collaborate. And we published a set of guidelines in partnership with your society that has been highly cited and used for practical, for management of these patients that are, relatively complex and require multidisciplinary care. So really delighted with that partnership between our two societies. These guidelines have, as I just said, made huge contributions to patient care. The contributions that you all make as endocrine surgeons beyond just, thyroid, parathyroid, is clearly evident from, all the awards that were just highlighted and all the contributions you make to other, endocrine organs in the body. We truly value what you all do, and I'm sure that this meeting will provide great insights, great developments. You'll have great discussions and in-person networking opportunities to take your field even further. Again, welcome to Birmingham, welcome to UAB. We're honored to host this meeting here. Have a wonderful meeting and great deliberations. Thank you all again.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Birmingham. It's great to see everybody here. Just a quick announcement. A couple weeks ago, should have seen by email, announcement go out for self-nominations for committees for next year. We've moved the deadline up a little bit, so there's not as much of a gap in between the meeting and when the committees can get started. So let me see here. Yeah, so this is the image that you can scan again, and anyone who is interested in self-nominating, please do. You can take out your phones and again, point your camera there. You get a message to open up a link and click on this, and you can complete the self-nomination form. The self-nominations will close on Sunday, May 7th, so you have time when you get back from the meeting to take a look through the open slots. There's about 60 open slots this year, and we will do our best again to try and get as many people involved as possible. So at this point, I'd like to ask Shagaye Alibadi to come to the stage. She is the chair of the membership committee, and she will introduce the new members to us.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce to you to our new members, a very accomplished group of individuals, and many of them have already been involved in our association for multiple years and contributed in very meaningful ways. So I hope over the next few days you'll take the opportunity to seek them out, introduce yourself, and personally welcome them to AAES. As I call out the names of our new members, if I could please have you come up to the front of the stage and stay up here so that we can recognize you as a group. So as far as our active members, may I call Dr. Anna Aronova up to the stage, please? Luliana Bobanga. Catherine Cohen. Sophie Dream. Jessica Fazenden. Sarah Fisher. Trenton Foster. Claire Graves. Anna Islam. Monica Jane. Colleen Kierman. Denise Lee. Amin Madani. Catherine McManus. Rohit Ranganath. Henry Reinhardt. Carlos Gustavo Rivera Robledo. Minerva Romero Arenas. Tony Rudin. Thank you. Scott Sherman. Angelica Silva Figueroa. Erivelto Volpe. Sean Wren. James Wu. And Jonathan Zagzag. Please join me in welcoming them. Thank you. You may take your seats. For our corresponding members, if I could call Gabriela Matarazzi, Amit Sen Dural, and for our allied specialists, Eric Bergson and Jennifer Sipos. If you're here today, could you please come up? Great. Thank you.
Congratulations to all our new members. It's a great pleasure to invite you to, welcome you to the meeting and the membership. The next thing I want to do is call our chair of the research committee, Ben James, to the stage to give you an address. Come on up.
Good morning. Next, we'll have 3 presentations from our 2021 award recipients. The Paul Lajurfo Research Awards are funded by the AAES Foundation each year, and through the generous partnership with FICA, they are financially supporting the Thyroid Cancer Survivors Association Award for thyroid cancer research. So first up, we'll have Priya Dediya from The Ohio State University, presenting on targeting WNT and IGF-2 pathways in adrenal cortical carcinoma.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity to present some of our work since receiving the award, and that has been made possible from this award. So I have nothing to disclose. So first I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing more recently. So first I'll talk about using single-cell RNA sequencing to identify a new target of metastasis in adrenocortical carcinoma, and we think this is a Wnt target. So then I'll show you some TCGA data that we think confirms MMP14, which is a matrix metalloproteinase, as a predictor of worse prognosis. And then finally, we'll show you a little bit of functional data that suggests that MMP14 might drive metastasis, and it's driven, and it's a downstream regulator of the Wnt pathway. So as we all may know, adrenocortical carcinoma is a pretty aggressive disease, and there aren't great treatments for this. So currently, our most advanced treatments only really improve disease progression by about an average of 5 months. So Wnt is activated in about 85% of adrenocortical carcinomas. And despite knowing this, and despite having studied adrenocortical carcinoma for quite some time now, we really haven't identified any new targeted therapies. What's interesting, though, is that Wnt activation correlates with metastasis and poor prognosis in adrenocortical carcinoma. So these are some of our single-cell RNA sequencing data of adrenocortical carcinoma. And what that is we basically take a look at the transcriptional programs of each individual cell in the adrenocortical carcinoma. So when we look at this just globally, what you can see is that there are two clusters or subpopulations in primary adrenocortical carcinoma and metastatic adrenocortical carcinoma that are really not present at all in the normal and adenoma samples. So using these data, we looked to see what are some potential drivers of metastasis. And one of the things that we identified was MMP14. So we don't really see any expression of MMP14 in normal adrenocortical carcinoma or in adenomatous tissue, but we do see pretty high expression. We see a slight increase of expression in MMP14 in primary adrenocortical carcinoma, and this is even further upregulated in metastatic adrenocortical carcinoma. Now you may be wondering, what is MMP14? So it's a matrix metalloproteinase, and like many other matrix metalloproteinases, it leads to degradation of the extracellular matrix. So what's interesting, though, is that when we look at MMP14 expression in our single-cell RNA sequencing data, we see that it's particularly upregulated in those two clusters that are only present in the primary and metastatic ACC samples. So if we look at this another way, we can see that in just the cell populations of the adrenal cortex, those two clusters show both an increase in the total amount of MMP14 expression as well as the percentage of cells that are expressing MMP14. So now we want to see, well, is this potentially related to Wnt activation? And so what we find when we look at our single-cell RNA sequencing data is that when we categorize on just the MMP14 high-expressing cells, we see that they have an increased Wnt activation score compared to the MMP14 low-expressing cells. So we wanted to look at TCGA to see, does this, is MMP14 really important, or does it not really make a difference at all? And so when we look at MMP14, the first thing that we saw right off the bat is that it's the most highly expressed MMP in of all of the MMPs in ACC, and that it's increased in a stage-specific manner. So the highest expressing patients are stage 4 patients. Those have the highest MMP14 expression. And that correlates with survival as well. So MMP14 high-expressing patients have the worst survival compared to MMP14 low-expressing patients. So then we categorized the patients into those that had mutations of the Wnt pathway and those that didn't have mutations in the Wnt pathway. And what we found was that patients with mutations in the Wnt pathway had higher MMP14 expression compared to those that didn't have mutations. So this kind of suggests that maybe MMP14 is a downstream target of the Wnt pathway. So now we wanted to see, does all of this even matter? Is it functional? So we looked at a cell line, and this is a pretty standard adrenocortical carcinoma cell line, and we saw there's very, very high expression of MMP14 in that cell line. But what's really interesting is that if we inhibit the Wnt pathway, we can see downregulation of MMP14. So this suggests that MMP14 is probably downstream of Wnt. But now, of course, we want to know, well, does this even matter? Is it functional? So the way that we did that was we used a biosensor that when that biosensor is cleaved by a matrix metalloproteinase, that it leads to fluorescence. And so what we found when we created organoids or three-dimensional structures of that cell line is that we do get fluorescence, indicating that there's MMP activity, and that we can quench that activity with an MMP inhibitor. So you can see that there. So now we wanted to really see, well, does this make a difference in metastasis? So when you have one of those harebrained ideas and you're like, well, there's maybe like a 1% chance that this might work. This was one of those ideas. So we collaborated with a bioengineer who has this metastasis on a chip model, and we thought, okay, well, can we put these adrenocortical carcinoma cells into this metastasis on a chip model and see if they can invade this lung organoid? So we have this lung organoid, as you can see here, in this microfluidic chip, and then we circulate the media in the microfluidic chip for 4 days. And then what's really cool is that we can actually track the cells going into this lung organoid. So you can see those little red lines at the bottom are the ACC cells invading into the lung organoid. So when we use an MMP inhibitor, we don't see any difference in the total number of cells that get to the lung organoid, but we see a significant decrease in the number of cells that are invading into that lung organoid. So this suggests that MMP14 might play a role in invasion into target site target site metastasis as opposed to actually getting to the target. So now our next steps are we're going to use our patient-derived tumor organoids, which I'll show you a little bit of data here, to see if we can see the same thing with our MMP14 expressing cells in our patient-derived tumor organoids. So in these organoids, which are made from patients, we can see that they represent the patients in the level of cortisol production. So we just have a couple of examples here, where with one patient that had normal cortisol production, we see that there's normal cortisol production by the organoid. Similarly, with a patient with hypercortisolism, there's increased expression of cortisol. And then they appear to have similar responses to drugs. So there was one patient that responded to mitotane and EDP, and we see that their organoids have a bigger response compared to that patient that didn't have a response to mitotane and EDP. And then what's also interesting is that we see heterogeneous expression of MMP14. So this suggests that maybe the MMP14 high cells are the ones that are able to metastasize and get to distant sites, and potentially targeting MMP14 might be a way to prevent metastasis or invasion into that target site tissues. So basically what we think is going on is that Wnt activation leads to MMP14 expression, and that MMP14 expression is required to invade into a distant site. And what we're doing now is we're targeting MMP14 specifically, and our preliminary experiments suggest that targeting MMP14 can decrease invasion into that target site. And then we want to look at metastasis of using our adrenocortical carcinoma patient-derived tumor organoids. And so with that, I'd like to thank all of the members of my lab, especially Ludmila Popova, who did a lot of the work that I've shown you, and then our collaborators as well. And thanks to the AAES Paul Lagerfo Research Award, because with that, I've been able to get additional sources of funding, which has really helped with the progress of the lab. So thank you very much.
Next up, Bernessa Lindeman will be presenting from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Entrustable Professional Activities in Endocrine Surgery, ensuring trainees are prepared for unsupervised practice.
Thank you all very much for the opportunity, and thank you specifically to the AAES Foundation and the Lagerfo Award for their support of our work. And so I am the grant recipient. I also want to disclose I'm a counselor for the American Board of Surgery, as well as the lead facilitator for the ABS EPA writing group. Those two things won't be discussed, but it may give you some indication of my a priori bias toward the concept of EPAs, if you weren't aware of that already. Okay, so that we are all on the same page, the definition, very simply, of an entrustable professional activity: they are essential tasks of a discipline that an individual can be trusted to perform independently in a given context. Said another way, it's the work of a professional. All of the things that you do as an endocrine surgeon. And we already think about how much we can trust the trainees that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So this might be me, what I'm thinking on a good day. I can let the resident or the fellow start, and I can just scrub in for the key portion of the case. Or perhaps if I know very little about the trainee that I'm working with, I don't have much experience with them, or they're a fairly junior resident, then I might be thinking the opposite. Well, I've got to be there for the entire time. The challenge is that these decisions that we make every day about how much we are applying trust are not currently documented, nor are they based on any type of standardized descriptions of behavior. It's all about the things that we are in our head and our preconceived notions, and unfortunately, often our biases. And so on the heels, or perhaps the ball of the foot of the movement nationally toward competency-based assessment, led by the American Board of Surgery and their 2-year EPA pilot in general surgery, the AAES Executive Council allowed us to put together a group to write entrustable professional activities for endocrine surgery, really defining what are the essential tasks of our discipline. And so I wanted to acknowledge these tremendous, hardworking members of our group that were part of the drafting panel that helped to put these together. It is not an insignificant amount of work to write EPAs. And their work is shown on the slide as follows. So, like many EPAs, if you have seen them before, we have core EPAs for our discipline. And most of them exist across 3 phases of care: the preoperative phase of care, intraoperative phase of care, and postoperative phase of care. There are some things that are part of our fellowship requirements that our fellows must do that we evaluate in a single phase of care. Things like managing patients with an inherited endocrinopathy, utilizing ultrasound, being part of a multidisciplinary team, participating in scholarly efforts. And then there are other experiences that many programs will offer to fellows, but it's a way that fellowships customize the types of educational offerings they provide. And so there are 4 elective EPAs that we would not expect all fellows to gain full entrustability with, but that some may be able to demonstrate based on their prior experiences. So we put together and launched, with the support of the LaGerfo grant, a pilot study of EPAs for endocrine surgery. It borrows the same micro-assessment tool that has been utilized for the ABS general surgery pilot, where it's a 3-question assessment. The first is a rating of case complexity, because that does influence the degree of autonomy or entrustment that's provided. Then there is a rating based on specific targeted behaviors of how much you would trust this person to perform this task the next time that you see something similar. And then there's an opportunity to provide narrative feedback that is dictated or typed into the field. And like the ABS, we were hoping to target the levels of indirect supervision or practice ready. And so I am delighted to present the preliminary data to date. These are for this academic year. And so far, we have 557 entrustment ratings from 24 unique trainees. Those are not all endocrine surgery fellows. There are 14, you'll note that the PGY 6 level in the table, it's 13 endocrine surgery fellows included in the population. And so there are many residents that have been evaluated as well from 22 unique faculty members, with individuals receiving anywhere from 1 to 208 evaluations. And so if I direct your attention to the table, you'll see that we had no PGY-1 residents included in the sample, but otherwise had PGYs 2, 3, 4, and 6. And that the thyroid EPA was evaluated most commonly, followed by the parathyroid EPA. Overall, it's probably not a surprise that if we break this down by phase of care, we have far more assessments in the intraoperative phase of care than the pre- and postoperative phases of care. And this was mirrored in the results from the general surgery EPA pilot as well. I'll orient you briefly to this slide, where limited participation, the lowest level of entrustment, is in red, and you progress with increasing entrustability through green and blue. And we ideally want to see people at least yellow, green, or blue. And assuringly, we see that the people that are more advanced in their training years tend to be entrusted with more responsibility. This is just for thyroid and parathyroid in the intraoperative phase of care alone. And these data are a bit messy because different faculty at different institutions provide different degrees of entrustment. And so if we look at the institution that provided the highest number of EPA microassessments, we can see that there are 5 residents and 1 fellow that were evaluated at that institution. And not surprisingly, we see that The residents primarily achieved an indirect supervision level of entrustment, though one person barely got there and 2 made it to practice ready, while the fellow has gone past and is now teaching others. So next steps for the study include gathering feedback from pilot participants on feasibility, things that help participation, barriers to participation. We are continuing with a full 2 years of data collection, and so I urge you to sign up. If you are not participating now and you would like to, whether or not you have a fellowship program, you can be part of the trial. It is free to you because it is covered by the generous grant that we have received. And so with that, I thank you very much. And I also put up my contact information as local arrangements chair. I would be delighted to hear from you at any point about anything that you need. Thank you so much.
All right, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Ben James. He is the chair of our research committee, and he's done an absolutely fantastic job this year with one of the busiest committees. He comes to us from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. He was the recipient of the Thyroid Cancer Survivors Association Award for Thyroid Cancer Research. THICA is obviously a very important organization to our association. His presentation is titled Assessing Objective Financial Toxicity in Thyroid Cancer Patients.
Good morning. I'll try and give a 60-minute talk in 8 minutes, so I apologize for speaking quickly. This work has also received funding from the Martin and Diane Trust Career Development Chair, the Cummings Scholarship Fund, as well as recent funding obtained through the American Society of Transplantation. In 2014, we conducted a national study evaluating quality of life in thyroid cancer survivors, which laid some of the groundwork for our understanding of the decrease in quality of life experienced by survivors. However, we also noted that survivors reported financial burden associated with their cancer diagnosis. This single study finding sparked my interest in this topic. A couple of years prior to our quality of life study, Scott Ramsey et al. Published a study evaluating the incidence of bankruptcy in cancer survivors and found that cancer patients were 2.5 times more likely to experience bankruptcy, and thyroid cancer patients had the highest bankruptcy rate of any cancer type, with an incidence rate of 9.3 per 1,000 person years. The authors speculated that thyroid cancer affects younger women more often than other cancers, and these women are more likely than men to live in single-income households, to have lower wages, and to have lower rates of employment and high-quality health insurance access, all of which leave them more financially vulnerable. But to back up, what is financial toxicity? The concept of financial toxicity captures the financial impact of illness in different realms: how often people go into debt, declare bankruptcy, or change their lifestyle simply because they cannot afford the treatment costs associated with their care. Essentially, financial toxicity occurs when the financial impact of a patient's care overwhelms his or her available resources. Financial toxicity encompasses both objective and subjective financial burden, where the direct and indirect costs lead to subjective financial distress, ultimately resulting in financial toxicity. I started on this journey by first studying subjective financial toxicity. Using a 2011 medical expenditure panel survey, we evaluated financial stress, material hardship, and psychological financial hardship between thyroid and non-thyroid cancer patients, and found that thyroid cancer survivors were more likely to experience material and psychological hardship. In a subsequent study, we surveyed 147 thyroid cancer survivors on their financial burden and found that 16% reported financial burden, 50% reported psychological financial hardship, and 25% reported not being adequately informed about costs. Most importantly, this financial burden occurred even in patients with protective financial factors. In our most recent work, using the MEPS study again, we evaluated catastrophic healthcare expenditures and found that of the 17 million cancer patients, thyroid cancer patients were more likely to incur debt from their diagnosis and treatment. And finally, in work by our fearless leader, who conducted the largest survey of thyroid cancer survivors on quality of life and financial distress, a shocking 24% of participants noted that they had to use all or most of their savings to pay for their thyroid cancer care. The problem is, to date, our predominant understanding of the financial burden of cancer care has been based on patient-reported estimates of out-of-pocket costs or debts incurred, and this data has been primarily acquired via patient surveys, which has obvious limitations. Our research group therefore recommended the better use of primary data sources, improvement in study design, and the piloting of interventions to alleviate the burden of cancer. This leads me to the present study, the evaluation of objective financial toxicity in thyroid cancer survivors. What I learned from this process is not that. I believe the rest of my slides are missing. Do you need to reload them? Or you can keep going. Yeah, I could keep going without them. I promised they were up there this morning at 7:30. Oh, there we go. Okay. What I learned from this process is that doing quality, worthwhile health services research can be very hard. We first started on this journey roughly 4 years ago and talked to many experts in the field, and I'll note some were less helpful than others. Ultimately, we believe the best way to understand objective financial toxicity was through collaboration with credit bureaus. Our plan was to link data from the Massachusetts Cancer Registry with a credit bureau. The major issue with doing this kind of work is that by law, credit bureaus are not allowed to release identifiable information. What complicates this is that medical entities are not comfortable releasing medical data to non-HIPAA covered entities, so there is no simple way to merge these kind of data. After almost a year of discussion with the MCR, we obtained approval through the legal department to work with the MCR and thought this was a green light to proceed. We then began to work with Experian and received the FICA award to partially pay for the purchasing of these data, and this is where things started to get very complicated. First, although we were initially told by the Massachusetts Cancer Registry that they would approve this collaboration, ultimately when we submitted the IRB, they rejected it, citing that all patients within the MCR have a cancer diagnosis, and so providing any patient data to a credit bureau would by default be providing data on patients with a known cancer, thereby identifying these patients as cancer patients. The only way they would agree to give PHI was to have people from the credit bureau physically fly into town, merge the data on site with the Massachusetts Cancer Registry, which, as you can imagine, the credit bureau would not do. We then attempted to use our own institutional data to merge with Experian, and 6 months after going down that IRB path, we're told that we needed to go back and obtain written consent from every single one of our 1,000 cancer patients. At this point, I decided it was probably best to return the money. And at the last minute, something interesting happened. In October of last year, the head epidemiologist for the Massachusetts Cancer Registry was at a national conference and heard a talk on data sharing, and our previous IRB application came to her mind. After hearing the talk, she was inspired to convince the MCR to approve the study with lots of qualifiers, and after 3 years of efforts, the IRB was finally approved in December of 2022. Ultimately, the MCR created a file of cancer patients and an internal control group, thereby de-identifying the cancer group when exporting the data while still sending PHI. And in March, this data was finally sent to Experian. Believe it or not, we received this data roughly 5 days before this presentation, and my team has been furiously analyzing this data. Couple understands why I wasn't at the tequila tasting last night. I will say we obtained hundreds of financial variables and obviously many cancer variables across cancer types, and we have barely scratched the surface on these data, but this is what we have learned so far. We were able to obtain over 10,000 thyroid cancer patients with a match rate of 83% through Experian, resulting in a final cohort of 8,200 patients with a median follow-up time of 1,800 days. Our very preliminary analysis suggests that the incidence rate of bankruptcy in Massachusetts for thyroid cancer survivors is 2.1%, or 2.1 per 1,000 person years, second only to uterine cancer. Now, these results are very difficult to interpret. We're still analyzing the control group, but if you look at the bankruptcy rate in Massachusetts, which is far less than 1%, this rate is substantially higher than the general Massachusetts population. So in conclusion, I believe we have shown through multiple studies that patients report significant subjective financial toxicity related to their cancer diagnosis, and preliminary data suggests that they also experience substantial objective financial toxicity. Our next step is to do a deep dive into the thousands of variables we have access to evaluate not just bankruptcy, but many other aspects of objective toxicity, which will inform future prospective studies. Obviously, this work has been the effort of many people and multiple sources of financial support. I'd like to thank the FICA organization for funding this research, as well as every member of my research team, including Jorge Gomez and Aaron Fleischman, who dropped everything that they were doing this past week to furiously get these results across the finish line. Thank you. Yeah, so the winners of the 2023 awards will be presented at the gala dinner. We also have brand new data about previous award winners at that dinner, so I look forward to sharing that with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, that's going to be great. The data on the previous award winners, I think, is fascinating.